Lovely to see you all. My name's Nick Fuggle. I'm a clinical academic rheumatologist. I'm based down in at the University of Southampton, and I'm one of the co-organizers of the Clinical AI Interest Group at the Alan Turing Institute, together with Elise Davies, Emma Caroon, and Joe Alderman, who I don't think is joining us today, sadly. Elise, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Alicia Davis. I'm the Head of Research and Evaluation in Public Health Wales, a consultant in public health, and just generally curious about AI and all things health. So yeah, just great working with Nick and Emma in this space. So Emma, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hello, I'm Emma. I'm a principal researcher at the Alan Turing Institute and one of the other co-organisers. I'm doing at the moment lots of qualitative research about how we're using AI and in biomedical data science. So hello.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Right, so we've got introductions out of the way, and we're actually going to dive straight into our thematic section of our session today. So it gives us great pleasure to welcome Lucinda Scharff from Google. Lucinda has been a clinical doctor. She then worked at a startup. She then moved to Google DeepMind, and she's now working in Google as a whole within the health area. Lucinda, we're really excited to hear what you've got to say to us today. I know that you might welcome some short questions as they come up, if they're kind of short and easy to answer. But if not, we can save questions till the end.
Sounds good. You can save the long and difficult to answer ones for when we've finished.
We'll do some curation. We'll do some curation.
That's okay. I can take it. Hi, everybody. All right, let me just get my slides sorted out. I assume you can see it.
We can see them. Good. Yeah, perfectly clearly. They look beautiful.
Ready to go. Okay. Yes. Well, I will say this deck is a hodgepodge, and the beautiful ones were made by other people, and the ugly ones were made by me. Slides is not my skill set, and the AI for slide creation is not where I need it to be right now. But that's a topic for a different day. Or a complaint I can make, I guess, internally. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here with all of you. I'm a member of this group, and so I've been at sort of several of these on the other side, but it's great to be here speaking with all of you. My name is Nick. Nick gave me a great introduction. I'm Lucinda Scharff. I'm a staff clinical specialist at Google, where I work with healthcare and life sciences partners across EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, to bring the best of Google's research, products, and technologies to impact health outcomes at scale, which is incredibly broad and a great job to be doing. As I said, here's one of my ugly slides. As some background, both to my perspectives and to this talk. I'm a medical doctor. That was where I started. I trained in Oxford. I started my career in the NHS. I worked in Northwest London, I'm sure with many of you at Northwick Park at various times. And then I did a bit of sidestepping. I helped build an early stage startup in kind of 2016, 2017. From there, I joined what was the DeepMind health team working on streams, and then Google about 6 years ago. And I've been working at the intersection of frontier AI and health ever since, focusing on the US and also more recently on the EMEA markets. Today, I work within Google's clinical team. We are a team of about 60 clinicians now. We're global. We stretch from Japan and Israel and India all the way across to the west coast of the US. We're mainly doctors, but we also have nurses and psychologists on our team, and we're soon to have some dietitians and sports scientists. So we're broadening our clinical disciplines a bit. And we all work across Google in all of the major areas with every major product to ensure that we meet our mission of harnessing all of these tools and technologies to help everyone everywhere to live a longer, healthier life. I think the majority of the talks I've been to with this group have been with researchers. And so I want to say up front, I'm not a researcher. I'm a terrible researcher. My job is the next bit. So my job is to take the cutting edge AI research that this organization produces, and then to help product and engineering teams deliver real impact with those tools and technologies in healthcare and also life sciences very broadly. And with that in mind, what I want to focus on for today is the opportunities that we have now, or that we were going to have very soon, given the pace of progress that we're seeing, to build AI solutions that solve many of today's biggest problems for healthcare, and to discuss some of the things that I think need to be true to make this happen. I was saying to Nick and Emma at the start, it's actually coming into this, it feels like a really hard group to speak to, because there is such a diversity of talent and of skills. And so I went back to the Clinical AI Interest Group's website. So this group has a mission around sharing, educating, and pooling of knowledge and ideas. And so I guess in the spirit of that, I want to make sure that we have some time for proper discussion and to get some of your perspectives on these opportunities and where we agree and disagree. And so, as Nick said, happy to take kind of quick questions as we go. You can kind of shout out or wave a hand if I don't see you. But we're also going to make sure we have plenty of time to get into some questions at the end. So let's start with where we are today. I think probably most people on this group are UK based. But in reality, the more I have worked with health systems in the USA, in Europe and beyond, the challenges that we see here and face are the same as those being faced by healthcare systems all over the world. There is no doubt that healthcare is under significant pressure globally. This slide I just pulled is really highlighting the kind of worker shortage problem, which we feel here, but is absolutely a global challenge. We all know that the healthcare worker shortage was exacerbated by COVID. It's been exacerbated by the problems around burnout, but actually has been an impending problem for much longer than that. In many parts of the world, due to retirement kind of outpacing the influx of new clinicians. I was speaking with a healthcare system in Germany recently, and they said within the next 5 years, they're going to lose 30% of their workforce just through retirement, which they just cannot possibly look to replace. And also in other markets, due to kind of brain drain and people leaving those systems. So, we see that by 2030, we're expecting a 6.1 million healthcare worker, so not just doctor, but shortage in Africa. And that only sort of increases the discrepancies. So World Health Organization reported the 6.5-fold difference in worker density between high and low income countries. So if we think that it feels bad here, imagine how it feels in other parts of the world. We also have an aging population. We have increasingly complex chronic multimorbidity. I think we can all agree it's not well suited to be managed in acute care settings, and it's not necessarily well suited to be managed in a system where you have a primary and a secondary care that are both separately funded and separately managed, with these sort of liminal spaces, I suppose, in between and in that kind of prevention space. And all of those lead to disparities in health outcomes, which have not improved. In the UK, those who are in the most deprived areas are twice as likely to die from cardiovascular disease as those in the least deprived areas. And I think it always feels shocking to me. We have a healthy life expectancy gap, which still sits at around 19-20 years for both males and females in this country between the most and least deprived areas. So we have significant challenges, which are not just ours. At the same time, we are living in a world where the advancements in technology, and importantly, the technology which is accessible to consumers, are coming at an unprecedented, unbelievable rate. And I think we have all felt that over the last few years. The new wave of generative AI, large language, and multimodal models is a fundamentally different technology and a different paradigm. And I can't take credit for this slide, but I do think it's pretty cute. We are seeing increasingly capable base, general, and specialist models being released, what feels like weekly. I think the general sort of opinion on AGI timelines are converging on around the kind of next 5 years, depending on who you are and how you choose to define it. And I think most importantly, these models are being broadly adopted across all sectors, not just healthcare, but actually much more so in other areas. And so those technologies are becoming increasingly commonplace in the lives of everybody, and sort of everybody who is then also a patient of a healthcare system. And I credit these slides. These actually come from a Albion VC analysis they did of the European health tech market. But these are just to show that we're seeing trends emerging in the health tech space in response to these factors. So in response to these system difficulties, and then in response to these consumer available technology advancements. And I spent a lot of, it was a bit closer to our original date, but I spent a lot of June at both NHS ConfEd and then in Amsterdam at the Health Europe conference, which is a real startup heavy space. And besides the sort of 200 AI scribes that we saw while we were there were three key themes that I kind of want to highlight and shown somewhat here. So one was just an absolute boom in AI-based and generative AI-based solutions. And that was in the startup world, but it was actually at every level. So within the healthcare systems and also within the EHR layers, everybody, the availability to build these technologies is just vastly easier than it ever was before. And we're seeing the proliferation of sort of vibe coding and things like that. Number two, we're seeing a consumerization of the expectations of health services. And I think this is driven by lots of different things. And also some of that is probably the availability of these sort of consumer technologies, but for immediacy and in particular for virtual first solutions rather than in-person first. And hand in hand with that, number three, we're seeing a significant change in the payment models that these startups or these clinics are offering. So both an increase in pay-as-you-go solutions, which I think if you'd looked back 5 years, we would have assumed wasn't really going to be a thing within a UK healthcare market, but also insurtech and in particular kind of employer-focused solutions, which have always been something within sort of really big corporates, but haven't necessarily been as sort of broadly available within the UK and the European markets. And so we're at this sort of point in time where we're seeing these things come together. We've got these big difficulties, but we've got these big opportunities, and we have to respond. And so I wanted to talk about what I see as some of the greatest but real opportunities to tackle problems and make a difference to clinicians, patients, and systems. And so I want to talk through three key, quite big areas of opportunity today. One is, how do we scale clinician impact, solve the problems of staff shortages and wait lists, but also improving the experience for those clinicians at the same time and not as an afterthought? Number two, how do we ride this wave of the consumerization of healthcare and this increasing access to advanced AI technologies, putting more power and agency and to a degree responsibility in patients or consumers of healthcare's hands? And three, I'm going to sidestep a little bit from healthcare into the life sciences space, although the two are intrinsically linked, and think about how do we radically transform the processes of drug development and clinical trials so we get these treatments to patients faster and earlier and improve healthcare in that way. So I'm going to start with topic one, which I think is the one I feel most passionately about, which is this scaling clinician impact and improving the experience for clinicians. I think often when we talk about sort of scaling clinician impact alone, we get into these sort of thorny conversations about productivity, which I kind of hate, because clinicians are incredibly productive in very difficult circumstances, and sort of assuming that we will just use AI to squeeze in an extra appointment a day, I think is wrong. I think it also, we often end up in this not particularly helpful conversation about replacing clinicians with AI. And whenever people ask that question, I kind of want to take them back to that slide we had about healthcare shortages and say, like, there aren't enough clinicians for us to begin to replace, but there is this really big gap that we do have to fill safely and effectively. And the only way we might be able to do that is to be able to scale a clinician from a one, let's call it a 1 to 100 ratio, to a 1 to 1,000, or even 1 to 10,000, right? Depending on the part of the world that we're in or the conditions that we're thinking about. And the other part to this is that we don't want to replace clinicians or replace their jobs. But there are large parts of clinicians' jobs that they really hate, and they really would like us, I think, probably to replace, particularly in that sort of administrative area. And so I'm going to further divide this bucket into some clinical and to some administrative AI, and to build upon some examples of tech that maybe at Google we've already built and deployed, and some of the things that the forms that we could think about. I think dividing this way, clinical and administrative, is not very clear cut, and I actually struggle sometimes to know which bucket to put them in, but bear with me. I think the admin piece is often considered less exciting, but it's important to start with the administrative use cases, because it's actually, I believe, where the most immediate positive impact can be had. From a tactical standpoint, there are often areas where safety and regulatory concerns are lessened, even though they're still present. But importantly, where if you get these things right, you can release cash and time. And if you can release a bit of cash and time within a healthcare system, you open the door to do the sort of complex longer term work that is required to develop and test and regulate and deploy clinically focused systems, which just can be a bit more intensive. So this is 2025. I think we all can and should now imagine a future where burdensome, repetitive administrative tasks should be all but removed from human workflows. And we should imagine the positive impact that that is going to have on the work and lives of clinicians. There is a really long list of activities that fall into this criteria. And importantly, we are already starting to see solutions for today. So for example, there are lots of startups doing things like medical coding, like Fair AI, and there is roster management and AI call center support. And for clinicians, intelligent documentation seems to really be at the forefront of where these solutions are. And so the first use case, which is a real today use case I'd like to highlight, is some work we did with HCA Healthcare using generative AI to support handover. So HCA Healthcare and Google Cloud worked together to develop an AI-powered tool called Nurse Handoff, great name, to streamline and improve that kind of critical process of transferring patient information between nurses during shift changes. And it was specifically built with the aim of leveraging generative AI models to reduce the administrative burden on healthcare professionals. HCA predicted that their nurses were spending 10 million hours per year on this task alone. And so even a small difference in the time spent on this, if you could at the same time increase kind of the accuracy and the consistency of that work, would have a significant impact both on the staff, on the time that they could spend doing other things, and therefore also on patients. So what they did was they used various generative AI models from Google, but essentially Gemini, to ingest and analyze data from the electronic health record and generate a sort of concise, organized, structured, factual summary for the oncoming nurse. And importantly, this was available to the nurse on shift on a mobile device, or is available during the day. So they can, there is a human input, they can add, they can review the information, but the basis of this thing is done. And the approach is intended to provide a more consistent, comprehensive handoff, promote patient safety, and free up time for people to spend on direct patient care. It's had a really positive impact. I'm not going to try and butcher the stats, but essentially it's saved, in order of hours each day. And the satisfaction, importantly, from the nursing staff is important. And then they're then able to use that time either to just do their other jobs better, with less strain, I suppose, but also to spend that time with patients. Of course, this is today, and there is so much more that we could do than summarization on a mobile phone, right? And I would challenge us to think about, like, what are some of the other form factors that we could use to change the experience for clinicians, whilst also sort of augmenting these administrative tasks. So today, the way that we have constructed the system, and even like the structure of a doctor's office or the structure of a ward, is heavily focused around the technology that we're going to use. You walk into your GP and there's a desk with a computer on it, which is kind of the center. And there might be there might be a bed in the corner, but it's very much focused around that computer sort of setup. But even with all of the AI scribes we have now, well, how does that change that? Do you need the computer in the room? Could you actually just have sort of iPad or something like that? Could you center it around? Could you make it feel more like a therapy office, right? And center it around a couple of couches. And the same could be true if we think about some of these other form factors. So, and a couple of areas I want to highlight and get your imagination going. One is Project Mariner, which was a DeepMind effort. It was a prototype really for human agent interaction on a browser. So what would the experience for clinicians be like if actually an agent is controlling your browser for you, and you can see it? It can gather multimodal inputs, so text and voice and video, or imaging from other systems, etc. But it could just execute, even within the systems we have today, it can just do that execution for you. So it could order, schedule, summarize, etc. And how would that change the setup? How would that change the interaction? How would that change how the job feels? I think a step further than that is to think about, increasingly we have access to streaming on our phone and the kind of live streaming agent experiences. And so we've seen released Project Astra, which was a sort of prototype for a universal assistant on your phone or on your glasses, which fully enables that kind of free-flowing conversation with memory. Actually, if what would that experience be like if you don't even have to have a computer in the room with an agent controlling a browser, but it's happening in that free-flowing way? And obviously, these are not things that are about to happen tomorrow, but I think it's important that as we think about removing these administrative tasks from clinicians' workflow, that we think about the form factor and we think about that experience as a whole, and not just maintaining what we have today. I want to pivot to think about some more directly clinical AI use cases. And I'm sure some of you will have seen this video perhaps before, but I think it explains it better than I could. And so it's just 3 minutes. So I'm going to play that, if that's okay, Nick. I think you can be my barometer of whether this is working or not. Let's do it this way.
Yes, it's working.
I think there is a special thing about pediatric oncology where you are following the patient and the family for a long time. You become part of the family. The Prinses Maxima Center is the only center in the Netherlands that treats kids with cancer. When I came here, one of the projects that we developed was the International Tumor Board for Leukemia.
A tumor board is the weekly meeting we have with all the pediatric oncologists.
It's the experts from every country in Europe.
We talk with 15 to 25 specialists, and that gives the opportunity to discuss and guide your treatment decisions. An important source of knowledge is the medical journals that publish on pediatric oncology and novel therapies, but it's impossible to read everything, especially if it's not directly within your scope of interest.
So I think the challenge is not only clinical, it's also in research.
In every case, I need to go to the literature to validate every step of the way, and that takes time. So I had this idea that AI can screen the abstracts instead of me. So I pitched it to Google, and then for 4 months, Google Cloud gave me their permission to work with 7 engineers. And I was like, oh my God, this is like my dream.
We have Gemini, we have a whole lot of information. And if we bring all these together, maybe we can enable doctors to find more treatment options for their patients in a shorter time.
Capricorn is an AI tool that built with Google Gemini models to screen all the abstracts in PubMed, which is the largest medical library there is, with over 37 million papers. Capricorn is sitting just on the other side of cancer. And we thought it's very symbolic to develop a tool that will fight cancer. So we call it Capricorn.
We use Capricorn using de-identified data of patients as an input.
Before every weekly discussion, I put all the clinical history of a patient in Capricorn.
The age,
allergies,
the genetic mutations of the disease,
whether they're overexpression of genes,
cell surface expression of proteins,
drug sensitivity tests,
treatment responses.
And then it comes back with a list of possibilities. He said, if you have this mutation, this is the best treatment I could find, and here's the paper. It used to take me around 2 to 3 days to do the same literature review like AI did in 40 seconds. A Capricorn is not making decision for you. As a tumor board, it gives us the ability to make sure we cover all bases and we know all the possibilities, but then we have to sit together with all the expertise we have and to decide what is best for the patient. If it helps us, I can only imagine what it can be to other parts of the world that has no access to experts like we do.
The day you inform their families that they have a child with cancer is really a day that is going to change their lives forever. With artificial intelligence, we will have more time to do what artificial intelligence cannot do, is to talk and to spend time with our patients and their families.
And Capricorn is only the beginning.
I feel like I always feel quite emotional when I watch this video, but I think it is the perfect example of not replacing clinicians, scaling clinicians, reducing the time. You know, I'm not suggesting that the clinicians at this hospital don't want to read 2 to 3 days worth of paper, but there's only so many papers a human can possibly read, and therefore there is only so many children that this team can support, and there are many parts of the world that don't have access. You know, this is an international European pediatric tumor board. It's a highly specialized group of people, and there are many areas in the world which could not begin to develop something like this even without, you know, even just the tumor board, right? Let alone the sort of the scale with which that you can do this now. And so I think it for me, that sort of 2 to 3 days down to, I think it's now down to like 30 seconds that you can produce these outputs. And it is just a starting point. I mean, as he said, currently it's putting de-identified data in, right? Like how do you then have to overcome the challenges of, well, how do you add even more, and how do you get these models to understand even more complex genetic data, for example, or more complex imaging data. But I think it is just a really perfect example of how these tools can scale clinicians, and you could kind of see from the video that the positive impact that this has on the clinicians within this team. Using Capricorn helps clinicians interrogate and actually analyze large amounts of text-based data. But I think, as we were saying, as you start to add in more and more modalities to these data sets, it's also really interesting to think about how can we identify like new ways of interacting with clinical data for clinicians, and for clinicians without specific expertise, for example, and also for patients. And so this is a little bit more of a perhaps even a lighthearted example, but we call this conversation with a chest X-ray. And this was taken from a paper about Gemini models in medicine. There were 2 of them actually last year, and so I'm happy to send them over, or you can find them. And it's got a whole bunch of different examples. You know, how do you have a conversation with a photo of a skin lesion, for example? But in this example, we're seeing a diagnostic dialogue in natural language, but quite clinical natural language, between an AI agent, Gemini, and a clinician actor made up within discussing this chest X-ray. And what this example illustrates in the back and forth is the potential for these systems to act as an assistant to either a less specialized or perhaps a non-specialized clinician, and to be able to identify the changes, explain the changes, demonstrate its medical knowledge, but also to be able to then pivot and provide that language in more layperson's terms. So it demonstrates the potential for sort of both clinicians of different levels and skill sets and specialties to understand this data in new ways that might feel more natural to them, but also to very quickly then move that towards patients. Which I think brings us very nicely onto how AI in healthcare can be a critical way of empowering patients and citizens or consumers. When we think of what AI will make possible in healthcare in the future, we have to imagine a dramatic shift towards this sort of agentic, autonomous, always-on support throughout the lifetime of a citizen, from health promotion right through to care delivery. As we said at the beginning, consumers are already adopting these technologies across their lives, and they are already adopting these technologies in health. And we see that through usage of Google products. So this is just like one example of AI-powered search results, but AI overviews are now one of search's most used features. It's used by, I think it's more than 1 billion people every month now, in 100 different countries and territories. But all this is to illustrate that these sort of social channels augmented by generative AI, whether that's YouTube content being translated into multiple different languages, or whether it's search and that written or video or whichever mode content being translated, not just into other languages, but into sort of lay terms or terms that meet the education level of the person who is receiving it, it will be a really important vehicle by which individuals can access widespread personalized and relevant healthcare information, not from a clinical person. I think the role of AI will be sort of multifold, right, from that sort of health prevention through to sort of navigating care delivery, but critically provides citizens with the ability to engage with the content. So, for example, I don't know if any of you have used Notebook LM, where you can sort of interact with the podcast by kind of joining in and asking a question, or even just using ChatGPT or Gemini, where you can back and forth and sort of check your answers or check your understanding in multiple formats, in multiple inputs, in multiple voices, chosen language, increasing that engagement and understanding. And that engagement and understanding is important and will be the first step. And we're already seeing AI being deployed there, but maintaining healthy behaviors over a lifetime is incredibly difficult, and the bit that we're not necessarily that good at supporting today. And so we can imagine a near future, and in fact, many consumer apps are kind of already moving there. If you look at the likes of Whoop and Fitbit, etc., where maintaining that wellness and that health promotion behavior will be supported by a highly individualized, hyper-personalized health coach AI. And you can imagine that personalized by wellness data, by data that the user chooses to connect, potentially by a medical record if they choose to connect it. And a personalized coach would move us from where we are today, where we might get sort of a list of recommendations or perhaps timed notifications that are predominantly based on sort of sex and age, often, to something that's much more personalized, dynamic, that you can engage with, ask questions, that is also incorporated into your life in a way that, can it schedule an appointment that's actually appropriate based on your calendar, for example? Or can it see that there is a family history of this, and therefore we should move something earlier in a schedule for you? Of course, not everything can be prevented. I think we often talk about health prevention like we're going to prevent 100% of conditions, and that's not going to be the case. But once individuals do need, I'm sure we've all had to access a healthcare system at some point, and many of us are in the room are clinicians, and we know that we have this ability to sort of advocate and navigate a healthcare system that is different to those that are not with them. But you can imagine that with AI and with agents that are connected to systems such as calendar and maps and this sort of wealth of wellness and healthcare knowledge, that wayfinder services will become more common and will help patients navigate appointments, preparation for appointments, referrals and treatments, and sort of provide that centralized view of their healthcare and sort of connecting back to where we started, that view, that empowering them with that information and with the coaching to be able to make changes for themselves kind of outside of being in that healthcare setting. You can then totally imagine how many of the other forms that we were discussing, whether it was browser-based or streaming, will sort of come into their own again for citizens in the same way, sort of navigating those administrative and clinical systems for clinicians. I'm going to just sidestep a little bit into the drug development process, because I think the number one, this is an area where we've seen just enormous change in the past 5 years, particularly around sort of the protein folding drug targets, drug discovery end of the spectrum, but also where many of the technologies we've just thought about in terms of clinicians and patients can actually radically transform that drug development process. And the ultimate sort of goal of that is getting these treatments and therapeutics to patients faster, and therefore having that positive impact on the healthcare system. I think whenever I'm talking to sort of pharmaceutical life sciences partners, one of the pieces that I can never quite get my head around is how far in advance these organizations have to plan, and just how long and uncertain the process is from sort of early target identification through to getting these drugs to market, for many, many good reasons. But this is just one of many diagrams showing kind of the time period in order of years for each step. Even that sort of phase 1, 2, and 3 coming so far down the list, and that being another 6 or 7 year chunk. And I think if we look at this diagram and we think about that drug development process outside of drug discovery, it is rich with opportunity to bring AI technology and to reduce some of these by even a fraction of time. At the moment, and you can see phase 1, 2, and 3, sort of 2/3 of the way down the page, by the time a drug gets to a phase 1 trial, it still only has about a 1 in 9 chance of making it to market. So you've already invested, maybe 5 years, maybe 7 years, plus all the research that went before, and you've still only got that like 1 in 9 or so chance of actually making a positive, and ultimately a positive impact in humans. And so there are, one of the things that particularly excites me is how we think about this development process as opposed to the sort of biochemistry itself. So there's a couple of technologies I want to share and how I think I see them fitting in. So the first I want to talk about is AI Co-Scientist, something we released in March this year, which is an AI lab partner and collaborator that uses advanced scientific reasoning to identify gaps in the biomedical research and to generate novel hypotheses, and suggest a detailed research plan to validate that hypothesis. I think the simplest way is to think of it as like an AI that can read vast amounts of scientific literature and identify the gaps and then come up with hypotheses. And essentially, it's not one agent under the hood, it's multiple, and they're fighting with each other to come up with the best idea. And that's how you kind of push up the quality of, and sort of remove those that are least likely to work kind of through that competition. And so far, it's been able to identify already some opportunities to repurpose drugs in the treatment of AML and identify novel treatment targets. And that sort of repurposing is really interesting because, of course, you remove a lot of those phases in the trial process that we see. If you can repurpose something, actually, you've done a lot of the safety and other trials already. But I think where this I feel is really interesting is actually in that detailed research plan and for validation of this hypothesis. Having sort of there's a version of this that's available on the market right now. It's called Idea Generator. And sometimes we show it to life sciences customers, and you almost see that, the ones in the room that have got a PhD and spent 3 months writing a protocol want to weep, because whilst it's not going to do 100% of the job, if you can give it the information it needs and the context, actually it can write a proposal within minutes, depending on how much context you give it. Maybe we're stretching into hours, but really minutes. And is it 100% perfect? No, but is it a really, really good start that would have taken somebody months to do? And you've cut that time down. And if you think about across that drug development process, we're looking at how many times you might need to write and review a protocol and get people to agree on it. If you can cut each one of those down by days, weeks, months, you've shaved a huge amount of time off that process. And so I think for me, that kind of process piece of it is really exciting. And the last one I want to just talk about is a group of models. It's TX Gemma, which is about understanding drug properties and toxicity. It's a collection of open models designed to help improve the efficiency of AI-powered drug sort of discovery and development. It's built on Gemma, which is a collection of models, which is lightweight, open, based on exactly the same research and technology as Gemini, the large model, but just much smaller, can be sort of run anywhere, versions you can run on a phone, right? It's able to understand both regular text, but also representations of different biomedical structures, so small molecules, chemicals, proteins. And it means you can ask questions to help predict important properties of potential new therapies like safety, lipid solubility, will it cross the blood-brain barrier, potential interactions, toxicities. And what really excites me about this isn't so much the drug discovery piece, but it's actually, if you're owning that whole process of end-to-end drug discovery through to getting a drug to market, are there, these pieces around toxicity and safety used to come in a way quite late in the process because they were done in vitro, in animals, in humans. And actually, if you can do some of these pieces sort of in silico and do them using AI, you can change the order of this process. So you might still want to do it later in humans, but if you can move some of that toxicology right up front and do it almost as one of the first things you do as soon as you discover a molecule, you can rule out lots of things that you would have otherwise taken through that chain. And actually, the hope would be that not only do you shorten the time, but rather than it being a 1 in 9 or so chance when you get to phase 1, even if you make that 1 in 5, you've dramatically increased kind of the throughput over time. And so it's really exciting, I think, to think about the impact on healthcare in the success rates of these therapies coming to market. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, but I'm going to take the opportunity of having your attention to make a plug for one for this and one for a piece of content. I was really fortunate a few weeks ago to go to the launch of Challenge Work's Longitudinal Prize on ALS. Really exciting group of people, left that room thinking we are absolutely going to solve this problem. It's a £7.5 million pot, which would be distributed to a small number of groups over 5 years. Importantly, you do not need to have a full team to enter. So if you are somebody who has lots of AI expertise, but absolutely no knowledge of neurology or ALS, that's great. You can enter as an individual, and the same is true the other way. So if we have any neurologists in the group who are particularly interested in joining, then you also do not need to have AI knowledge. We can work together. So really exciting. I'm totally neutral to this. I just went to the event, but I think it's so exciting, and I think we really have an opportunity to do something impactful both in ALS, but also in other kind of neurological diseases. So great use case for some of the technologies we've just described. And my second, I thought about sharing or trying to explain context engineering to you all. And then I thought, well, I'm just pulling this from a blog that a DeepMind engineer called Philip Schmidt wrote, and actually you should just go read his blog, and it's much better. So I've reproduced this with his permission. But if you'd asked me a few years ago about if you'd asked me about interoperability and the sort of generative AI and hospital data, I think a couple of years ago, I would have sort of been leaning towards hypothesizing that having these really large, really capable models that felt like they were being released every week, and every general model was superseding any specialist model you could ever produce, would sort of solve a lot of those problems, and those data problems would kind of be in the rear view mirror. And I think I'm sure I was not the only person thinking that way. And I think some of that is a consequence of the benchmarks that we use, because even today, the benchmarks that we use for a lot of these models know medicine, but they don't know your patient, and they don't know your system, and they don't know your guidelines. And so, a couple of years ago, I said, well, the model will know it all, and you just need to know how to ask the model the right questions. And that has some validity, and prompt engineering has become, a huge discipline in its own right. But I think when we think about healthcare, we have to sort of come back down to earth a little bit and realize that actually that interoperability piece still remains hugely valid when we're talking about something as complex as medicine, and about our systems and about our specific patients. And so I would really implore you, if you're going to read, I've got a whole list of resources at the end, but if you're going to read one, I would read this blog. Philip is a very good writer, and basically right information, right format, right time is still really important to get LLMs to do what you want them to do. And it's not just interoperability. There are lots of different elements that come into it. As you can see, the things like, well, what are the other tools that the model has available to it, and of course the memory piece is extending all the time. But he will explain it better than me. So I will just implore you to go and read his blog. And otherwise, I think I've seen 25 questions pop up, which scares me a little bit. So maybe we will move on to questions, if that's okay, Nick.
No, that was absolutely brilliant. And can everyone join me in a round of applause for Lucinda for an amazing talk, and covering such a diverse, a smorgasbord of different issues around this field. Yes, there are questions. And if anyone is willing to kind of unmute when we come to them, that would be brilliant. There was an interesting one actually that came up quite recently about the Capricorn performance evaluation. And that was from Aizan Anwar. Aizan, are you able to unmute and ask your question yourself? If not, I'll do it for you.
Hi, Lucinda. So lovely to see you in person. I heard your podcast with, I think, Nick Grimes. Anyway, so I had an experience with, so I'm a clinician, but I'm finishing up my PhD in AI. And I found that actually automated systems require a lot of manual work, and especially something that requires a lot of domain expertise. I had to put on my clinical hat to evaluate self-supervised clinical embeddings. And that's the dark side, I suppose, of AI that we don't often talk about. For me, there's a lot of manual dirty work, and I wonder in industry, especially in Google, how you do that for a self-supervised system like Capricorn. What does it look like?
Oh, yes, you're totally right. How is really varied. And so I'm trying to think through exactly how they did it for Capricorn. I might have to look up the paper for you and send it.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just send it to the group. But like, you're right, it does require a huge amount of human input. Usually, for us, we have 3 really clear like AI principles, which essentially is like bold and responsible, but the final one, and for health is often the most important, is together. So almost everything we do in partnership with a research organization, like with a university, with a research organization, for example, and not because we can't do our own rigorous research, but because some of these disciplines are maybe outside of our skill set, or because of the independence of wanting that evaluation. So essentially, like the short answer is in partnership with research organizations. But yeah, I'll look up, I don't want to sit here and try and Google it now, but I'll find the Capricorn stuff for you, and I'll send it to the group along with the other resources, and maybe.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah, because what I found is that there are a battery of evaluation metrics out there, and a lot of the time people can actually game which metric they want to use, because some metrics will give you really nice performances and some are really bad. So you could actually pick and choose which metrics show your AI system in the best light.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. And I think one of the like overall tricky things about this time that we're in, I suppose, is like what is the right metric? What is the right way to do it? And the truth is, like, we can get very hung up on, oh gosh, well, this is large language models or multimodal models, and we don't know how to evaluate them. But that isn't true, because the principles of evaluation remain the same. We still want these things to be, safe and clinically accurate, and the answers to be complete. And we want to think about key biases that they might show, and specific harms. And so I think the principles of how these things are evaluated remains the same as sort of non-AI tools to AI tools, and sort of the sort of more classic AI tools as we move into kind of a generative era. But you're right, and like it would I'm sure everybody would love to just create a benchmark that shows that their thing is the best, like, and that doesn't help anybody, does it?
That's one of the kind of classic things when reviewing papers, is to look at whichever performance metric they've used and then ask them to just provide the authors to provide other performance metrics that haven't been included, just to see whether it demonstrates a similar level of performance.
And I think that's when often it's interesting to have independent evaluation, right? So like, when we see these evaluations be published where they've taken lots of the different models that are available, and they've sort of independently put them one against another across a series of tasks, I think that adds you have to weight these things differently, don't we, when we're thinking
Yeah.
about performance? You know, who in the same for any research in the sort of critical evaluation is sort of a similar process.
Absolutely. Alicia, you had a question.
Oh, mine was kind of building on that theme, but I was interested in not just in the Capricorn model, but maybe in those empowering patients ones as well. How to capture the benefits for patient outcomes. So there's a lot on efficiencies. You can understand that, and you know, some of that is like, yes, of course, brilliant. But did it change decision making, and did it mean that it was a better outcome for patients or public? How do we get better at capturing some of that?
I think it's tricky when you step from that kind of more like wellness consumer general information into that more health care lens, right? I think I even remember, you know, I can think of examples internally where I've been working, this is years ago now, but on a particular healthcare focused product, and the product people we were working with came from like the Play Store world, and so what they wanted to measure was like net promoter score. I remember having a sort of argument with someone saying, the hospital CIO does not care about the net promoter score of this tool. They do not even know what a net promoter score is, right? And so I think that it is tricky to sort of, you know, shift that mindset from like, well, people use it and people like it, to like, well, what is the downstream impact of that? Again, it's the sort of thing that, like, from a Google perspective, we usually would do in collaboration with another organization. So for example, looking at like, you know, how do you embed YouTube health content into specific pathways, and then like evaluating that pathway as opposed to the status quo, for example. And so it's not like specifically the tool, but actually it's the whole pathway that comes around it, and that whole service that is being evaluated. And I suppose then there are ways where you could split it and say, well, we'll test with and we'll test without, but often these things are more that sort of service evaluation, I suppose, than necessarily like an RCT, but they are done. You know, we've seen, and there's lots of evidence, for example, with like on the use of wearables. I don't know now what the number is, but it's in the tens of thousands of papers have been published around the use of all sorts of different wearables in different pathways, and demonstrated the positive impact that has. And then also if you add a coach on top of it, the positive impact that has. So I think it's not necessarily like a clean, always such a clean evaluation as we might like, but yeah, I think often it's sort of evaluated in that service model.
Lovely, thanks, Lucinda.
Brilliant. There have been a few questions about potential misinformation. So the availability of information, you know, AI search, for example, providing highlights of different information that could be around health and could lead to misinformation. One of the questions was about like how that within a health query, for example, how are particular rigorous sources of information chosen rather than less rigorously chosen sources of information?
Okay, so there are a huge number of processes and policies and teams that for us would be involved in that. I could probably talk, and we should probably get somebody to come and talk, because it's definitely a talk within its own right. But
I do feel, by the way, that you are being asked some pretty, like, given how
well,
big it is, some
I'll
pretty
just tell you what I
questions.
can tell you, or what I know, I suppose, more than anything. So there are multiple different policies and principles that are in place around responsible AI. There is obviously the law, there's sort of the regulation from a medical device standpoint that we have to take into account. There's our responsible AI principles, and there's also many internal policies around what makes something high quality health information, what makes something, you know, and what is harmful, and what is misinformation, and what kind of misinformation is harmful. And those policies are complex and have to evolve with the times. You know, if you think about the world and the internet pre-COVID, and then the impact of COVID on all of those sorts of experiences and processes, and the amount of people being driven to search engines and ChatGPT and TikTok and all these sorts of places. It's definitely had an impact. Broadly, it's about raising up good things and lowering bad things. So if things are considered to be high quality health information, so for example, on YouTube Health, one of the ways that we can mark content as being high quality is by the account that it comes from. So we have specific partnerships with healthcare organizations. So it could be like with NHS organizations or Mayo, or with healthcare charities that have a licensed clinician. So for example, it could be Mind or St John's Ambulance, and we use they still have to follow very specific policies actually, but we use those as sort of reasons to lift things up. We also have policies around specific sort of like blue ticked YouTube creators, for example. So they again have to go through an application process. They have to be licensed. So we take some of that as being kind of a proxy responsibility, I suppose. They have to their account has to be focused on health. So like you can't just be a doctor but like have a fitness account. Like it has to be a health focused account. You have to produce a certain amount of content. It's spot checked, for example. So there are different kind of markers you can use, and that's content that you would lift up. And then content that is lower quality sort of falls to the bottom, I suppose. It's probably the hardest challenge, isn't it? Like how do you Google ultimately is not the even on YouTube, we're not the content creator. We're sort of and we're often working in a space that is, could be different region to region and sort of ever evolving. But yes, maybe we can get someone to come in and talk from the health information team, do it more eloquently than me.
No, that was very eloquent. And actually, I guess that one of the helpful things, just from a user point of view, is the fact that, generally there are links to whichever website that information is coming from.
The grounding has been really, so the grounding was something we developed and used internally for a while before it then obviously has made its way. And actually across all of the different, I'm not across all of the Google products. So whether you're using kind of Gemini within the browser or AI Overview, for example, you should see grounding and the link. And these things are, should improve all the time. But that grounding is like certainly the piece that I find the most useful.
Is it really helpful? Fleur, do you want to? We've got time for one quick question, so please do go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. When integrating AI models into real clinical environments, what do you see as the biggest challenges in building trust among healthcare professionals?
So I think, well, the way not to do it is to go and impose something on healthcare professionals. I think if I had more time to talk today, if I had less to say, more to say, I would have talked about like training clinicians, because I think it's one of the areas that we are not doing well and need to put more effort into generally, like as a country, society, training these clinicians up, because I think the path to success is to involve them from the beginning. And that was true. And I don't think this is an AI thing. I think this was true when we were building technology that was not AI based. Getting people involved from the start, identifying who your champions are, and being responsive, when being open to hearing where it's working and where it's not working, essentially the fundamentals of good user experience research, like not assuming that you know everything, even if you are a clinician yourself, because each system has its sort of uniqueness. And so I think taking all of those principles from building non-AI software and from good UXR and implementing them, and obviously there are specific other areas, implementing them around those sort of bias and trust concerns, and essentially just really listening to the clinicians, I think, is the important part. And that's where the education is important, because clinicians need to feel able to have those conversations. They don't need to be experts, but they do need to feel able to engage and to know when to trust and what to look out for. And so I think those two kind of go hand in hand. I'm sorry, there are so many I didn't answer, but if people want to LinkedIn me, you can, and I'll try and answer.
Well, thank you again so much, Lucinda.
That's okay.
And if you were able to send us some of those papers for us to be able to then
I'll send you
around,
the slide at the back, because I think I made a slide with them all.
That would also, that'd be amazing. But we're going to finish there. Can everyone join me again in an enormous clinical AI roar of applause, so loud that Lucinda will be able to hear it in her soundproofed kind of den in Google. I presume you're in King's Cross, is that right? Yeah, in King's Cross. So really roar it out there. Thank you again so much for taking the time to speak to us. Our next meeting is on the 9th of September at 12 p.m. So we're taking August off. Have a great summer holiday, everyone, and look forward to catching up at the start of the new term.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.